today is to bring to you knowledge on the life of the late, great Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. To be honest with you all, some of you all here probably remember his pilgrimage, probably remember some of his work via television, or some of you all might have been in the same cities that he ventured in and he brought his speeches to. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I did not know of or hear of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. until that fatal night of April the 4th. On that night, I was with my foster family. I was in my fourth foster home at that time in Baltimore, Maryland. We were watching a program by the name of the Mod Squad that was on Channel 8. And I recall the black guy, since this is Black History Month, the black gentleman, his name is Clarence William III. Some of you all probably seen him in many movies during his career, and he's still acting as well. At the time, I said his name was Clarence William III, but his character was Link, L-I-N-K. That was his character name. And at the time, he was about to jump on the criminal within the program when it was interrupted. And David Brinkley, I don't know if that name rings a bell, the news anchor, David Brinkley, came on and he said distinctively, and it's amazing, at 11 years old, and I'm now 63, I still remember. I don't have to have notes or anything. It's printed on my brain. David Brinkley came on and he said, "We interrupt this program to bring you a special bulletin. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was just gunned down while standing on the second floor of the Lorraine Motel. Everything else that went into it, I don't remember such verbatim, such as that little piece." And during the time, what they did, they cut from the Mod Squad and they immediately went to the hotel where Dr. King was shot. To add on to that, in my own personal life, as a manager at the United States Post Office, they sent me to Memphis for training, for postal training. I took my son, I believe at the time was maybe about 9, 10 years old. And this was in the 80s. And while in Memphis, he was sick, he got sick, he got the chicken pox. So I wound up taking him to the hospital. Well, that hospital was St. Joseph in Memphis, Tennessee. The same hospital that they rushed Dr. King to. And as a matter of fact, Miss Dorothy, the other night, I was with my son, and we were talking about it. I mentioned to him, "Do you remember the trip you took with me to Memphis?" And he says, "Yes." And before I could come out and say the next thing, he said, "Yeah, you took me to the hospital that Dr. King died in." I said, "Oh." So he remembers that, even though he was a young kid. My great-great-grandmother, Mary Rogers, told me that she was, matter of fact, it was after the holiday had got approved. No, I'll take that back, because she had been gone by then. But somewhere along the line, she mentioned to me that she was at the speech in Washington, D.C. She was one of those 280,000 people that had gathered on the mall to hear Dr. Martin Luther King speak. I've looked at many footage over the years. Though I don't remember Dr. King, However, I took a distinct interest in his life, meaning that I've looked at numerous videos, documentaries, meaning that I had the distinct opportunity, just to let you know how good God is, to sit down at the table and break bread with his daughter, his baby girl, Bernice King. I've also had the opportunity to meet with Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's son, or should I say elder son, Martin Luther King III. I wrote a piece on Dr. King in 1985, during the time that Tampa has created its first Martin Luther King event. The name of the piece that I did was called A King Remembered. It's a four-page leaflet that I wrote, and believe it or not, during the first engagement of the King ceremony in Tampa, Florida, I printed up 500 copies of it, and I just gave it out to all the attendees at the event. Dr. Martin Luther King began his career as a pastor before he started out as a civil rights leader. Upon graduating from seminary school, he got his first commission. His first commission meaning that in Montgomery, Alabama, his first church was the Dexter Avenue Memorial Baptist Church. And just to let you know, Dr. King's youngest son, Dexter, is named after the church. I was very fortunate in 1999, believe it or not, I was on my way to New Orleans to what is called the Essence Festival. On my route, something hit me, and I was on 10. How many of you ever rode Interstate 10? I was on Interstate 10 going west to, attempting to go to Memphis. However, I ran across Interstate 65. I saw a sign that said Dothan, Alabama. I don't know what tempted me, what got in my head, but I went north. And I went north all the way to Birmingham, Alabama. When I got to Birmingham, Alabama, which I stayed in Birmingham for a few days, I got the opportunity to walk around and visit. Now some of you all probably remember the park where the dogs attacked. The park where a lot of the young kids were attacked. The park where some were shot with bullets. Not bullets to kill, but bullets to sting. This park was aired all over national television. And during that time, the President of the United States, President Lyndon Johnson, was disturbed that people outside of America could see what was going on with the blacks in the South of this country. And that is one of the reasons that the 1965 Voting Rights Act was signed by yours truly, Lyndon B. Johnson.
Lyndon B. Johnson.
Yes, ma'am. From Texas.
Bain.
Bain.
Right.
Yes, ma'am. Thanks for the correction.
No, that was an addition.
Yeah, oh.
Wasn't a correction.
Oh, okay, I'll take that.
You were right.
Yes. So,
Lyndon B. Johnson.
everybody, you know what? Everybody said Lyndon B. Johnson.
Lyndon B. Johnson.
Yes. And because of some situations that happened, he declined to run for re-election. because of some things that were going on in this country, President Johnson declined to run for re-election. As a matter of fact, as it went up to, started getting into the Vietnam situation, Dr. King basically had put his life out there because he began to speak against the Vietnam War. Now let me go back. As I was saying, he became the pastor of the Dexter Avenue Memorial Baptist Church at the age of 26 years old. And during the course of that, something else happened. What was that something else that happened? There was a young lady who was a member, she was a secretary for the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. She was a secretary. She was also a seamstress. And on this particular day, this young lady had got on a bus. She was tired, and she did not want to move once she sat in that chair. Her mindset was that the next time I move, it will be to get off this bus to go to my home. Well, back then, blacks were not allowed to sit in the front of the bus. And as you walked, excuse me, as you walked on the bus, meaning that you had to get on the bus from the front, pay your fare, walk back off the bus, and then proceed through the back door. And once you got to the back door, you made a left to the back of the bus. Now, from that back door, moving forth, that was for the white patrons, the white customers only. So if the back of the bus got full, that means that blacks were standing there, sitting there like sardines. Well, this young lady, she was determined to sit where she wanted to sit regardless of what the law said. She paid her fare and she sat down just before the back door. Matter of fact, she sat, here's the aisle, she sat right here. Well, the bus driver looked up and he saw that lady sitting there and he said, "You're going to have to move." Now, he didn't say it as nice as I said it. You can imagine what he said and how he said it. Well, she said in return that I am not moving, I'm tired, I had a hard day, you do what you wish, but I am not getting up out of this seat. Well, he asked her, or he told her 2 more times to get out that seat. As the bus moved forward, there was an officer standing down by the corner. He stopped the bus and he went forward to alert the officer that there was a Negro woman that did not want to get up out of that chair. The officer entered onto the bus and he demanded that this lady get up or else she was going to jail. And this lady kindly said that I am not getting up, you might as well go ahead on and take me to jail. And that lady, by the name of Miss Rosa Parks, who I had the good fortune and blessings to attend her funeral. And I also attended the, when she laid in state in Washington, D.C., I was one of the thousands to stand out in that cold and have an opportunity to go in and see her casket laying there.
Good for you.
Thank you. Now, once they took her to jail, the call came that we must do something about this. So they called no other than that 26-year-old pastor, that reverend, that doctor, Martin Luther King Jr. And from there, what is known as the famous civil rights movement was born. So what went forth from there is what is called the bus boycott. The bus boycott took place starting in December of 1955. As a matter of fact, Miss Dorothy, if I could tell them, December of 1955, December the 5th, 1 week exactly after I was born. I was born on November the 28th. Well, I take that back. That's 55. So one week and a year before I was born. Now, please listen what I'm about to tell you about this boycott. Can you imagine that all these African American people who had jobs, and most of the women who had jobs, their jobs was to go over into the cross town, into the rich part of town, to take care of the maid, to be a maid, to clean house, to go shopping, to take care of the babies. But how was they going to get there if the boycott was live and in action? Meaning that no one in the city of Montgomery, Alabama was riding on transit buses. The buses were empty for 365 days. No blacks rode on the buses. So the question is, how many of you all remember the cars of back then, the 1955 Buicks, the 1955 Pontiacs? I mean, they're a far cry from the cars that we have nowadays. The cars back then, they more or less had the little hump back there. So can you imagine, just put yourself in their place, 4 and 5 people sitting in these cars with the trunk open, and they're sitting in these cars squashed in because they still had to make a living. And they're squashed into these cars and they're sitting like this. And they're making their way off to whoever homes they were going to because they had to make a living. But they were going to make a living without riding on the city buses. Now the mayor of Montgomery, the mayor, the governor, city council, they balked. They were mad. They were upset. Not so much at the people, but they were upset at the director, the one who brought this march to life, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. King made an announcement. Now, he made an announcement on December the 5th, 1956. Now, a week after I was born. That blacks in this city will no longer have to ride on the back of the bus. You are free to ride anywhere you wish on these city buses. As of today, December the 5th, you are able to ride wherever you wish on these city buses. And as a matter of fact, there's a picture, there's a famous picture, and there also is another film of Dr. King and some of the city council personnel making their way onto the city bus. Not just making their way onto the city bus, but sitting in the front, right behind the driver of the bus. Moving on, there were other issues that would take place, such as in Birmingham, Alabama. In Birmingham, Alabama, there were 4 children that were in the basement of a church. Their parents had told them, let's go, it's time to go. Only one of those little girls adhered to the demand of let's go. You'll be surprised when I tell you who that little girl was, and she's still living today. As a matter of fact, a couple of years ago, she was commissioned to make a purchase as the first black to own a National Football League team. Wow. But she backed out. I heard the name. Condoleezza Rice was the 5th girl that was in that basement. But what saved her, when her mother said, let's go, she adhered and she left. But unfortunately, the other 4 girls that were in that basement were not so lucky, because they bombed that church on that Sunday morning. And those 4 little girls lost their life. Who were the perpetrators? The organization is known as no other than KKK, Ku Klux Klan. Now, I must share, and let me go a little further back in history if you don't mind, because some of you all have seen me come and do Frederick Douglass. Well, President Ulysses S. Grant was a good friend of Frederick Douglass. And during his presidency, he came up with a law. They called it the Klan Act. And 5,000 Ku Klux Klans were arrested, shot and killed, and the Klan suffered immensely. But that was in the late 1800s. So by the 60s, they had re-emerged in such a way that they were very dominant. Unlike today, if the KKK was to re-emerge today, blacks in this country, I'll just let you know, will definitely not fall prey. They will stand up and fight, and there will be great bloodshed. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., January the 15th, anybody know what date, what year? January 15th, anybody know what year that he was born? 1929, and anybody know what city?
What time are you going to open the bar?
Anybody know what city? I'll give you a hint. It's in Georgia. Atlanta, Georgia. His parents, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Sr., and his mother, Miss Alberta King. They had 3 children, 2 boys and 1 girl. Dr. King's sister, oldest sister, yes, oldest sister, is still among us today, Miss Christina King. Miss Christina King has written several children's books. So every Martin Luther King holiday, they shine the light on her, and of course they interview her. It says in 1935, September, Dr. King enrolled in David T. Howard Elementary, but later attended Atlanta University Laboratory School. Now, in 1944, September, would you believe that Dr. King, at the age of 15 years old, enrolled in Morehouse College? Dr. King was also taught by professors. And one of those professors is no other than the famous Reverend Lowry. Who is Reverend Lowry? Reverend Lowry became the first black man to sit on the Hillsborough County school board, on the school board over in Tampa. Reverend Lowry, okay? And he also taught Dr. King at Morehouse. Dr. King was so smart that he was allowed to skip the 12th grade. February the 25th, 1948, he was ordained as a Baptist minister. Moving forth, Dr. King became the first black to win the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964. Ladies and gentlemen, he was awarded $10,000 for winning that prize. I'm going to move forth in history. My numbers may be a little off. But how many of you all ever heard of a gentleman by the name of Barack Obama? He won the Nobel Peace Prize as well. He walked away with a purse of $200,000. Wow. Dr. King, with his $10,000, you know what he did with it? He gave it to the civil rights movement. And not to say that President Barack Obama did not donate a portion of his earnings as well. But just to let you know. Alright? To move on, Dr. King, January 26, 1956. Dr. King, to this day, holds the record for the most arrests, the most time in jail. Dr. King holds that record. But Dr. King going to jail is not going to jail because he committed a crime. Even though back then it was considered a crime to protest. But if you know, Dr. King said, we are not wrong for protesting for right. Because we have the right to be first-class citizens and not second-class citizens. Moving on. Let me get to something good here. In 1961, January the 30th, Dr. King, I don't know how many of you all can see this board here, but Dr. King was a father. He was a loving father. As a matter of fact, on April the 3rd, when he took that flight to Memphis prior to leaving home, his children begged him. Matter of fact, they ran outside and they jumped all over the car, begging Daddy not to leave. And it's funny, while Dr. King was in the car, it is noted that when I come back home, I'm going to make a change. I'm going to make a change because of the fact that my children are trying to tell me something. Well, we know what happened. He never made it back. Dr. King in New York City. He was in New York not just to speak, but he was in New York to do a book signing. Dr. King was rushed to the hospital. He was rushed to the hospital because some deranged young lady, black young lady, charged at him and stabbed him in his chest. She stabbed Dr. King with a letter opener. And yes, and she stabbed him right in his aorta. So that means that if he would have sneezed, we never would have had the Dr. King that we all came to know. And as you know, on August the 28th, 1963, how many of you all know what happened on that day? They wanted to protest, boycott, and let me back up because, you know, things are coming as I'm talking, things are coming in my head. And what just popped in my head, Dr. King at a younger age was put in jail. They put Dr. King in jail and the attempt was to send him to a rock farm. A rock farm doing hard labor. A rock farm where, like most prisoners, I forget the name of the prison that's in New Orleans, and it's still to this day they have the chain gang, where they take prisoners out and they go out X amount of miles and they stand and they break rocks all day.
Angola.
Thank you. Angola. Okay? Well, that's where they sent Dr. King. They wanted to silence him. Well, how long did that last? Because it was the 1960 presidential election. You had a Republican by the name of, and I'm sure, ma'am, I don't think nobody in here heard of this gentleman's name that I'm getting ready to share with them. The gentleman was no other than candidate Richard M. Nixon. See?
Milhouse Nixon.
Wow. She know those presidents. Okay? And the other gentleman was no other than John F. Kennedy on the Democratic side. Well, Mr. Kennedy was losing at the polls. Mr. Kennedy needed the black vote. Mr. Kennedy was not getting that black vote. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King was incarcerated. Well, as history has it, somebody made a call to Miss Coretta Scott King, Dr. King's wife. And they told Miss Coretta that we need the black vote. But we can't get that black vote because Dr. King is in jail. Well, her response was, you can get the black vote, but you must get my husband out of jail. Well, they moved forth to get Dr. King out of jail, and once they did that, it was on. John F. Kennedy became the youngest president of the United States with the black vote. Now I will share another personal bit. In my first grade class in Baltimore, Maryland, Turner Station Elementary, which was an all-black school, we went on a field trip. And I will tell you that, I will admit, and ma'am, I'm going to get in trouble. Miss Anita, I'm going to get in trouble for what I'm about to admit. All through my school years, I've always been what is known as the class clown. I guess that's why I'm such a great entertainer. Well, when they took us on this field trip, we went to the White House. As our class was walking down the hallway, I was the last student, and I was in the rear clowning around. Next thing I know, a hand appeared on my shoulder. And I was mad that day, and when that hand appeared on my shoulder, in my little mind, I said, somebody gonna get hurt up in